Welcome to Pod Band Pipecast, the premier pipe band podcast.
Hello and welcome again.
Welcome back.
He keeps getting it right.
I think that might have been better than the first one.
Yeah,
Maybe.
it was. It's more confident.
Yeah.
Yes, I was less tentative.
So we're here again with Angus Burke. And if you didn't watch last week's episode, we always say this. Why do you keep doing it? Go back.
Skipping ahead.
Yeah, go back and it's not going to make any sense. The
What are you
storyline is not going to.
Missing all the lore, the
I
Angus
know.
lore.
Yeah.
You got to know the lore. So you have watched it by this point or listened to it, which we understand that you have, of course, because why else would you be here? So today, Angus is going to talk about what he has done with this thing that he started called the Bloomington Piping Society. And I'm trying to give this as vague of an intro as possible to avoid spoilers.
Yeah.
And we like to, as you guys know, if you're regular listeners, we like to highlight, some local organizations that teach piping or do piping and do piping in different ways than you may be familiar with. So we're really excited to hear all about the Piping Society. Let's get to it.
So let's hear it. What the heck is the Bloomington Piping Society and what does it do?
So the Bloomington Pipers Society is it's a non-competing, non-band organization that we created here. So the history of it is we in Bloomington, we have a local band that is, well, mostly local. They're actually based in Columbus, Indiana, which is 45 minutes to the east of us, which is not that far, but when you're living in like southern Indiana, all the little towns, like, a far distance is a very different thing here than it is in a larger city. 45 minutes is a hike, as opposed to when you're in a big city, 45 minutes is across town. So, there's a band out in Columbus that has a unit here in Bloomington that practices together. And then everywhere else, like there's some bands up in Indianapolis, an hour north of us. And so we wanted to, because we didn't want to create an organization that would compete directly for membership with other organizations. We didn't want to create a situation where people would feel threatened by what we're doing, because that wasn't the point. So Piper Society, we started it as a non-band organization, as a place for everybody from all the different bands in the area could get together and just, be together and play fun music and just socialize between each other. And on top of that, we also wanted to make it an organization that would help educate new pipers and also provide opportunities for people to improve their own individual playing. So we always we exist to promote piping music education and improvement in South Central Indiana. We do that mostly through monthly events. We had been doing monthly like pub nights at a local restaurant where we'd get together and play for about an hour or two once a month. And then we also provide other events for folks to get involved in, tune tutorial sessions and public performances, things like that.
Cool. So it's not a band, but it's just kind of an
It's not.
organization.
There's a number of reasons why it's not a band, but yeah, it's not a band because we wanted to be able to bring in people from different organizations together as a sort of clearinghouse socially and educationally.
So it's like a club. Like a cool
Yeah.
Piper's Club.
Yeah, it's like a Piper's Club. Yeah. So the history for the Piping Society is I grew up in the Portland metro area, as we talked about last week. And Portland metro area, we not only had, so the band I grew up in was the Oregon Pipe, or the Sir James McDonald Pipe Band. But it was originally, for the first 10 years of its existence, the Oregon Piper Society Junior Pipe Band. The Oregon Piper Society is the organization. Every month they actually had the Oregon Piper Society. It was just we went to OPS. And OPS it ran from October through April every year. And it started out in the early afternoon as a competition. So every month they would have a competition for all grades, piping and drumming, starting from chanter up to grade 1. And they bring down judges or fly in judges from different places, normally somebody associated with Simon Fraser University, but also some other folks like more locally in Seattle and Portland to judge. They would judge the events. And so every month we had a solo competition in the off season. And at the end of the year, we'd get like aggregate prizes, and they would give out scholarships to piping schools and things like that. But in the evening, they also had the performance program that was more forward facing to the to general audiences. So the judge would be featured and they would perform. They would sometimes bring in bands. They would have one of the students who would be kind of like a featured student who would perform a set for folks. And they would bring in people like Alistair Gillis and Bruce Gandy to do performances and also workshops. And so that organization is really the one that, when I was talking to folks, that's what I had in mind. Because it wasn't just me, it was me, a man named Chris Eller, and then also a man named Jake Schrader. Chris Eller's still involved. Jake Schrader moved away. But it was kind of the Oregon Piper Society. We wanted to do what Oregon Piper Society did, just in Bloomington. It didn't turn out that way. Things are very different for us than it was with OPS. But it was the inspiration, because we wanted to provide those opportunities for players, because a lot of my love of piping really comes from just being immersed in that sort of environment that OPS provided. I was able to engage with people that are, Anne Gray from Canada, and Bruce Gandy, the Lee brothers, Alistair Gillis, folks like that. And it was a really good experience, and I wanted to be able to do that here.
Cool. You already talked about number 2, so we'll skip to the next one. So you said this ended up a little bit different. Things have been a little bit different for you. What were some of the challenges that you encountered when you started up this organization, and how did you overcome that?
So there's been a number of challenges with it. One of them is been a growing experience for me. Starting because when I started this, it was our first Piper Society event was in January of 2015, but we were talking about it in the fall of 2014 before we started it up. So Piper Society has now been around for 6 years as an organization, and we were thinking about it 7 years ago. So when I started it, then that means I was 25 rather than like I'm 31 now. So I was very freshly out of college. And a part of the growing experience has been the challenge of just overcoming me having the idea of what I wanted it to be versus, and trying to stubbornly stick to that versus letting it be what it can be successful as. Like learning how to be a little bit more flexible about what it was I was looking to do versus what it was that the community needed. And I think that was and has been a challenge, especially in the early days, was, part my own expectations and having to kind of learn to grow as a person to be a little bit better about that. But other like broader challenges we had was just, so I was like, well, I want to do the Oregon Piper Society in Bloomington. There's a number of problems trying to do that. One is Portland is a city of in excess of 1 million people, first of all, with a very long-standing tradition of pipe bands. Like you have the Kells pipe band, like Kells Irish Bar, they sponsor a pipe band. You have the Clan. I always want to say Clan McClay, but I don't know if that's exactly right. But it's they do compete, but they're primarily a performance band. They are one of the oldest pipe bands in the world, in the United States. And then there's, of course, all the competitive pipe band history there. Like Sir James MacDonald was preceded by other bands that were even at a higher grade level for adults, and also like a kids brigade, like a boys brigade band back in the 1970s. So there was a rich, long history of piping in the Portland area. And of course, it doesn't hurt that you have Vancouver, BC, with all the great pipers up there, a day's drive away. here in Bloomington, we're in the middle of southern Indiana. We're kind of off the beaten trail. We don't have an airport in our city, or at least not a big one. We have a local airport, but so it's a lot harder to get people out here. And also there's not as many people in the community. And so I wanted to be able to fly in people and like get like really good people coming in to do performances and things. And one, we don't have the money for that. We don't have the people for that. And OPS had the advantage of being nearby to people who could provide that. So that was a challenge, is, you know, the initial vision versus what reality we worked with, and trying to kind of commensurate that, so that was one thing. And the other part is just the community isn't there. Ultimately, Piper Society that we've been building has been more about developing the sort of community that I was hoping to serve, versus what Portland was, where Portland Oregon Piper Society was built to serve the community, whereas Bloomington Piping Society is more about building a community that can do that. And that's been a challenge, is just getting the people involved and recruiting new players and just building that sort of infrastructure and community that would allow us to do a little bit more than what we were initially capable of doing. So those have all been big challenges for us.
Yeah. Did you ever have resistance from people? Because like you said, you specifically said you didn't want it to compete with the other bands. And did you ever have resistance from people who would say, well, I don't want to associate with band XYZ or whatever?
Not really. One of the big challenges we've had in the past, not so much a problem anymore, because again, work we've been doing with the Piper Society to try to smooth this sort of thing over, is there has in the past been hostility between the competing bands and the non-competing bands, partially because non-competing bands have had promising new players, younger players, start with them, and then they want to do competition, and then they start doing both the non-competing band and the competing band. And then as they get more involved in the competition band, they leave one of the bands. And so there's between, like, you know, competitive pipers can be a little bit snooty about non-competing bands. It's something that happens.
No, really?
No. So like, where they're like, oh, well, they, you know, don't bother with those guys. Like, but it's like, you know, they're people, first of all, and two, they love the community, they love the music. And so you have that, where you have a kind of like this kind of down the nose attitude towards folks who don't compete. And then you have people in the bands that don't compete who feel defensive about competitive bands sometimes. It's different regardless of where you are. So like, but our direct experience locally there was a bit of that. So that was a challenge for us to kind of overcome that sort of suspicion of each other within the organizations, and providing a place where they can actually get along. And I think we've actually done a really good job at providing that space, because Piper, and I always have been, and I was probably, like, one of the bands I was playing in was a non-competing band, and then I started playing with a competing band, and I left the non-competing band. So like, I was an example of somebody leaving a band, but for that purpose. But I've tried to be when we do our teaching programs, I have tried to make it so if somebody has the idea to go and play with a competing band, it's their idea, rather than trying to actively recruit people to do it. Because we're just here to make people enjoy the music more and learn things like dance music, or learn how to, like, you know, they have challenges with like burls or something. Well, like, how do we give you the technique or the tools to be able to better approach the technique or better learn the music? And then if they want to do more with that in the competition way, they can. Or if they just want to improve their music for the band that they already play with, that's cool too. And by trying to be very careful and deliberate in letting people choose their own path as far as how they, you know, explore piping on their own, terms as part of the organization, I think we've done a good job at being able to bring people together from those different parts of the piping community. And that's one of those things where we've actually developed in that direction, because at first it was more, obviously the Oregon Piper Society was very focused on the competing side of things. And that was the original idea, was we'll do competition type stuff. Well, when most of your community isn't competitive pipers, you have to figure out how to make that work. And so letting things kind of do what they need to do to serve people the way they need to be served. That's something we've had to do.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of when we talked to we had a couple previous episodes with the Arizona Fire Service Pipe Band, which is firefighter and police pipe bands, and all the things that they do that is very separate from the competition world that a lot of us kind of grew up in and are used to, where, you know, of course you want to compete. Of course you want to do solos and you want to do bands and band competitions, and your goal is to move up in the grade levels, and that's what you want to do. And for a lot of the piping world, that's not actually even on their radar. Or they might have thought about it, you know, that's not for me for whatever reason.
Just doing it for fun.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks that we've run into is they're like, well, you know, I'd like to be participating in a world that makes my music better. Like something that gives me, you know, the goals. Like the thing about competition is it allows you to set goals about improvement. And I know some folks locally who are like, I would love to do that, but competition is super stressful and not fun for me. And I don't want anything to do with that. And it's like, well, that's fair. If you're not having fun playing pipes, what are you doing? So like, you know, we encourage people to compete and try to dispel a lot of the anxiety that people have about competition, because I do think like there are some people who may have come down to do workshops or things like that before who like to tell terror stories about what it's like to compete. And the competition can be terrifying. It can be very, very stressful, especially if you let yourself feel that way about it. And trying to dispel that, where it's like, guys, it's just a performance. That's it. Yeah, there's a judge telling you whether you're good or bad, but you know, that only, you know, that only can hurt you so much. Like if you're enjoying what you're doing, regardless of what a judge says, you know, you're okay. And if you're doing competition because you want to get better, then you know, the judge ideally is helping you with that. But we try to dispel the notion that it's a terrifying experience, but like we don't, you know, try to force people to do it.
Right. It's not like the judge is going to yell at you and worst playing ever.
Like, well, I've had a judge there. So I competed at Winter Storm one year and I had a terrible performance. I was doing a Pembroke performance at Winter Storm, and you know, I found this comical. Like it was an objectively terrible performance. And I thought this was comical. And I know there are other pipers who would be totally mortified by this experience. But I was just like, yeah, that's true, Judge. That's how it is. I went and played, and I struck up, and my pipes were great in the tuning room. And like I had other competitors come in and listen, and they're like, wow, that sounds really good. I think you're going to do really well. And I'm like, yeah, I think it sounds like it's doing pretty good, and I'm feeling comfortable about the music. Then I went up and I marched onto the stage, and went in front of the judge, and I told him what my tune was going to be. And he was like, okay, all right, you know, whenever you're ready. I strike up and I start warming up. And my chanter is in a totally different place than it was when I was in tuning. So like it flattened significantly, except the top hand was super sharp. And I was like, all right, well, maybe it's dry in here versus the other room. I'll just blow into it. And it just got sharper and sharper and sharper on the top hand. It was, and I was like, all right, there's something wrong here. And then like, you know, the first indication that something is going catastrophically wrong here is I had to take my chanter out of the stock in front of the judge during during tuning warm up for the competition. There was a big glob of seasoning sitting on top of the chanter reed.
Oh no.
And so I pulled it. I was like, oh, that explains it. And so I pulled it off. I put it back in, and then the channel wouldn't sound at all.
Oh no.
And then I was like, all right. I pulled it back out, and there was actually seasoning inside the reed. So I had to like kind of blow out the reed a little bit, and then I put it back in, and it was playing, but it was not nice. It was not like it was in the other room. And at this point, I was almost at the end of the tuning time, and I was like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I flew all the way here. I spent all this money to get here. I'm going to play the stupid tune. And so I did, and it was like a 12-minute pibroch, and it got worse and worse and worse. Where obviously more seasoning was coming out of my bag and going onto the chanter. Where like the high G on the pibroch was like just collapsing on me. Like it was an incredibly hard instrument to play because the reed was being weighed down. And so I got through the whole tune, 12 minutes of this thing, and I finished. And my brother was in the audience with an audio recorder. And every time I turned in that direction, I saw him. He was just like, with the audio recorder. It's like, oh, this is bad. And so I stopped and I turned and looked at the judge. And the judge looked at me, took his glasses off and put it on the table in front of him and just said, what a shame. and I was just like, all right, cool. That's and I, because I knew how awful that was, I was like, all right, yeah, well, that's kind of funny. And also, like, I know the guy that said that. And so it was very perfectly that judge. Like, it was the perfect thing he could have said. So I thought it was hilarious. I wasn't happy about it, but it was a very funny incident. But there are some people out there who would not like that.
Well, I mean,
so
you didn't die. You got through it.
I did survive. I did. And then the next year I went over and then I got like a fourth in the pibroch. So like, it was fine. It was fine. I just had a very bad day. And that happens.
Yeah.
But it was a very good experience regardless. It's just like, you have to, and that's the thing. Like, we try in Piper Society, when we talk about competition for people, we try to impart that attitude towards competition rather than a like, oh, you did badly. Well, shame on you. You should feel bad. So yeah, it's just a performance, and sometimes things don't go well. And you should take from that. Like for me, I took from that where I make sure that I make sure to check that is not going to happen next time.
It's a learning experience.
Yeah, you take it. You're like, well, because ultimately, what's competition? But it's meant to be a place where we showcase how we perform to judges. It's not just about the music we're playing. It's about presentation, about the dealing with the nerves and being able to go from tuning where you're not playing in front of anybody to playing in front of people and dealing with that and being able to make it so you perform well. You approach competition more that way, where you're just demonstrating performance. Then if you do poorly or there's some sort of mishap, well, that's a good thing to know. Like, it's good to know that can happen and how to in the future. So when you're being paid, $400 to play a wedding or something, that you're not doing that to somebody who's actually paying you to perform and provide entertainment. And that's more the attitude that I think folks should take towards competition. And it's what we at the Piper Society try to impart for people who are interested in going that route. Competition isn't the ends, it's the means. So
yeah. I like that. Yeah. Good way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
So what have you enjoyed about the Piping Society so far?
Weirdly, what I've enjoyed most about the Piping Society so far is in the last couple of years. So Bloomington, to contextualize the city of Bloomington, is we have Indiana University. And at Indiana University, we have, it's a Big Ten school, and it's a Research One university. It's it's comparable in population to ASU, so it's big. But we aren't Tempe. We're just a little town in southern Indiana. We're very big because the university's there. So as a result, we live in a city that has some really cool opportunities. We have a huge international student population because of IU's international work that we've done at the university. I work for IU, in my day job, but as a result, we have a lot of international folks here. We have a lot of people from East Asia. We have a lot of people from the Middle East here, and then a smaller portion of people from Europe and Eastern Europe, and also a smaller portion of people from Africa. We have a lot of money here because of the university, but the university also is large enough and has big arts programs. We have the Jacobs School of Music, which is a pretty well-respected music school. And we have a drama department and a ballet program and everything like that. So the university prides itself on bringing in a lot of cultural stuff into town. So we have a lot of things in Bloomington that would be comparable to a larger city as far as opportunities for, education and art. All of that is to say, we have a very diverse cultural interest in art here and in music. Bloomington's a very big music city. And so we actually have a lot of pipers in town, but they're not Scottish pipers.
Mm.
We have people who play like Bulgarian bagpipes in town, people who play the Galician gaita. We have a couple uilleann pipers in town, and then just, continental, Central European pipes and other instruments like that. One of the things I really have enjoyed about Piping Society is once I was able to kind of release my grip a little bit and let Piper Society be what the people in it wanted it to be, as opposed to just being a duplicate of something from Portland, Oregon, is a lot more of those people got interested in participating. And we started encouraging them to participate and trying to do some cross tradition stuff with each other. So, we will have demonstrations of people with other instruments entirely at our events, all these different or bagpipes. And so that's been really exciting for me because I've been able to learn a lot more about bagpipes as like you guys did an episode about like the instrument museum and about all the different types of bagpipes that were present there. And I've been able to learn a lot about non-Scottish pipes because of all the different people that are now involved in Piper Society, because we're kind of trying to reflect the community as opposed to make the community what we feel like it should be. And so it's been a really fun experience for me being able to, engage with those folks and trying to find ways to make my music and their music, work together because they're very different traditions. So that's been a lot of fun. That's one of my favorite things about Piper Society so far. But we've also started doing some public performances that we have integrated those folks into our actual demonstrations. Most of us are still Scottish pipers, so we lean heavy into Scottish piping because we have more of those than anybody else. But we also bring in the other pipers to demonstrate and show that bagpipes aren't just the folks with the kilts and the Highland pipes in Scotland, the Brave and Amazing Grace. It's a very rich tradition across many, many different cultures. But I've really enjoyed the public performances we've done because they're mostly meant to be educational. Like pipe bands do a lot of like school education demonstrations, and we've started doing that as well. And that's been really kind of fun to do locally. So not this year, but it's just been other years. It's been one of the highlights. I've enjoyed doing that.
Yeah, that's super cool to have the different types of pipes around, because that was kind of a disappointing thing about the Musical Instrument Museum was that we saw all these super cool, pretty pipes, but we couldn't hear them.
Yeah. Well, and all the different types of pipes sound so different too. It's like, oh, there's a bagpipe. Well, what does that even sound like? There's a piper here in town who actually has one of those the Iranian bagpipes, which sounds so totally different than ours. You wouldn't imagine if you were a piper or a person who's familiar with Scottish piping and you saw one of those in a museum, you wouldn't imagine it would sound like what it sounds like.
Oh,
So
I have to look it up now.
Yeah, now I need to hear what it sounds like.
well, the Piper Society Facebook page, we try to post things from all the different types of pipes in the world these days, because we have found that people find it interesting.
Yeah.
And we like to reflect that we for a while felt that we weren't serving non-Scottish pipers well enough in town. And so we've tried to provide a little bit more inclusion of non-Scottish piping in our organization.
That's cool. Yeah, I have to look it up. Look it up after
We're going to
this.
look it up.
Yep.
And you're going to look it up too, listener.
Yes. So
By
since
the way,
November, we've been doing like a rotation every Wednesday of videos. A lot of Scottish stuff is up there, but we also have like Iranian stuff and the Northumbrian pipes and stuff like that.
cool. By the way, is this all on Facebook or how can people?
This is all on Facebook.
Cool.
Yeah, we're also on Instagram, but our Facebook is the most active of our social media in that way.
So look it up, people who are listening.
Yes.
So speaking of people listening,
Mhm.
let's say, because this sounds really cool, sounds like an awesome organization that is really advancing piping in your local community and the piping world as a whole. What would you tell someone who is looking to start their own piping society?
So what I would say is find out who you have in your community and use them, like use them for what you're planning on doing. Like think about what your community is, who is in your community, who would be willing to participate, and then build what you're going to do. Like you guys mentioned, like, it sounds like a club. Treat it like that. We have like membership dues, so we can do things for people.
Do
Yeah.
Do things.
Yeah. So like we have that because ultimately we want to partially use that for like education development and stuff. So we are a dues paying organization, but we allow like people come to our events that aren't dues members, but the actual core membership is dues paying members to help give us a little bit of money where we can do some stuff. But I treat it more like a club where what you're just doing is trying to find what the people in your area are interested in and then fill that niche. And that could be just both the pipers in your area, but also the community. Like Portland, Oregon was a totally different thing because of, what Portland is, the history of the city and the history of the piping community and also the non-pipers in town. Wilmington's a very different place than that. If you're in a place like Boston or somewhere with a significant Irish American background, you might want to do something a little different than even what we've done. But find out or pay attention to your community. Find what niche would be a good place to fill that may not exist already, and then do that. I think it's good to take inspiration from other people, but also make sure that you're not copying somebody else's formula, because depending on where you are, it may not work for you. So be flexible and find the people that you have and make it work that way. That's what I would say. Do what people need rather than what you necessarily want. So
Yeah, not to say you're not going to get what you want, but
well, the thing is like you often don't know what you want. Something that I've over the course of my whole piping career have found is like, and when I started back up in piping again, I'd talk to people about my bagpiping, and it's like, I played with this band, I went to Scotland with this band twice, and I did this solo contest, and I was sitting there and I was like, I'm in my mid-20s and I'm telling people about things I did when I was a teenager, and that's not bad, but it does strike me as a little sad. So so like, instead of trying to like reclaim and rebuild something that was, just keep going, and you'll find that that's more what you want than what you thought you were looking for in the first place.
that's inspirational. I like it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Positive.
Good advice.
Positive vibes when we all need it most right now.
All right. Along with that, what are you most looking forward to about the Piping Society in the next couple of years?
So what I'm most looking forward to is some stuff that we had laid down to start doing, starting in 2020 as like some experiments, but something that we're actually going to once things open back up, we were looking at experimenting with doing group classes for pipes. So practice chanter classes in Scottish pipes. Because again, we're still a pretty small community of Scottish pipers, and the people who are interested in teaching is an even smaller number. And so trying to build as many pipers as we can and fill as much of the interest as we can is so trying to create an effective group lesson format and creating actual classes. And that's something I'm looking forward to doing. And it's something we've been talking about for a few years. We were going to start in 2020. And then everything went online and we figured that probably wasn't the best way to start. So I'm looking forward to being able to finally do that. And then I'm also looking forward to we're going to start doing, a lot of our events have been public facing, but we're going to start doing some ensemble stuff together, not like a band necessarily, but the idea would be we have a lot of new players who've never played in any pipe band before. And we kind of want to provide a space where people can learn, the basics of how to play in a pipe band. Like, how do you countermarch, for example? That's one of those things people
people still don't know.
A lot of pipers still don't. Well, because they don't practice it. Like a lot of bands, they don't feel the need to practice it, which is fine. There's more important things than being able to execute a really great countermarch. If you're a piper, if you're a drum major, you might feel differently about that. But so we're wanting to provide a place where people can be mixed in with a lot of more talented players who have a lot of experience, with new players who have not yet had those experiences, and provide a space for them to learn how to play in a band. So when they end up playing with whatever band they're going to play with, be it the fire or police bands or a non-competing performance band or a competition band, they can kind of show up and not have to be somebody that people have to hold the hand of, because a lot of bands are already trying to work with what they have. We want to be able to provide people that step between learning pipes and playing in the band. And so it also has the advantage of allowing us to practice our public presentation performances for people. So we can have a little bit of a routine we can go through locally to do like outreach, recruitment of new players and that sort of thing. So I'm looking forward to those too, being able to bring everybody in town together and do some basic ensemble work in that way. Those are the two big things that I'm really looking forward to in the next couple of years.
Other than just being able to play in person again, right?
Yeah. Well, like we did like we have there's a restaurant in town called the Runcible Spoon that was owned by an Irish expat, and he, like, the Irish music session once or every Tuesday night before COVID, there's an Irish musician group that, like, it's an actual pub session, and they play every week there on Tuesday nights. And we did a lot of stuff with them for the Scottish nights, was basically what they became, but they're like the bagpipe pub nights. And in the summer, they have this big patio area, so we'd be out there playing ensemble stuff together, or people like kind of going through and like, I'm going to play jigs or something, or we have a snare drummer who's a guest player who drove down from Indianapolis who wants to play snare drum. Well, I'm going to play some band stuff with that person. And so, like, people can hear the snare drums. And it's just like outside, there's like, tables with umbrellas and things, and it's in a garden. It's a very cool place. And then in the winter, everybody pulls out their small pipes, and we have some folks who play like guitar who used to play with Celtic musicians. And that's what we do, like in a small little room, and we'd have food and beer and all that. And I miss those. Those are really fun evenings that we did. And it'll be nice to get back to doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being on the show again, Angus. I feel like this is good because, like we said, a lot of the competition focused pipers are not even aware of other things that you can do.
Yeah.
With pipe band,
Yeah.
And I like, broadening our experiences. It's been fun.
And
Yeah.
there is a couple other organizations like us out there, like the Blackthorn Piper Society in Northern Ireland. They're really cool. I really think what they're doing is really awesome. It's very different than what we do, but that's because they're in Northern Ireland. They have different stuff. And then, of course, Pittsburgh Piping Society in the same areas like Carnegie Mellon and that program. They have something they're doing. St. Louis has somebody, they call it the St. Louis Drones Club. And
It's a club.
all of these are different
club.
kinds. Yeah, the St. Louis Drones Club, that's really cool. Like, think like Chris Apps and folks out there, the reed maker. They have their own thing going on, and they like, it's like a pub that they play at. So on big pipes all year round. So, but there's like all these different little like piping clubs, piping societies as organizations. One, they reflect the community they're in, and two, competitive pipers can go and play and not just, do an MSR and then a medley and then an MSR and then a medley. Like it's a place for competitive pipers to really kind of be a little creative and not be in front of a judge. So
No offense, judges. But
judges are cool.
But,
I like how, but
funny.
it
Yeah.
provides a little bit more for people to do. And I think that's cool.
Yeah. Thank you again. And people listening, now you have homework. You got to look up all those people, all those organizations we just mentioned. Google it
Right now.
Yeah.
right now.
It might even be something near you. So
Yeah. Who knows? I mean, we're in Arizona and there's stuff here. So
Yeah.
there's pipe bands here. So it's probably where you are.
Probably.
I
yeah.
don't know where you are. Maybe.
Who knows? Where are you?
All right. Well, thank you guys. We will see you all next week for something else. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this show, then support us on Patreon for exclusive content as well as the video of us recording this. We'll have special exercises we'll be writing as well as tips and tricks with tenor drumming and other instruments to come. Subscribe to us on YouTube for some tenor tutorials and possibly other tutorials later on. And like us on Facebook at Podband Pipecast.